thank you everyone for being here, giving me your time today. Thank you, Drew, for the introduction. I don't know that anyone said something that nice about me since the third grade, probably, so almost as if I wrote it myself, almost. So again, thanks everyone for your time here. I understand, trust me, the last session of the day, on the last day of the conference, LTL freight, typically the last thing people want to talk about or hear about, brings up kind of horror stories in people's minds, freight claims, classifications, how do I do it all? It's manual process, those kinds of things. So I appreciate you being here. As Drew said, there's an app you can submit questions. I have it open here to see those. Of course, if you want to just interrupt me while I'm speaking, just raise your hand and I'll address you, immediately, at that time. So thanks again for being here. And all jokes aside, the intent of this session really is to discuss the technologies, the transportation technologies that can, and practices that can help you enhance your operation, provide you with a solutions-based advantage over your competitors, and also enhance your customers and your customers' experience, right? Because food service, not only is it a network of manufacturers and dealers, distributors, but manufacturers sometimes pull double duty, acting as drop shippers, right, for potentially e-commerce shipments that you folks have sold to your end users, right? So it is also about your customers' experience, and it is a network of people that make that happen here, especially in food service. So before I go any further and people potentially space out on me, I do want to make three things very clear. It's probably the most three important things that we'll discuss here today, things that you folks can do as shippers and receivers of freight, and that is product library development, meaning assigning a freight class to all of your SKUs that you ship. That precedes almost everything in terms of automation goes. Second one being API integrations directly into your ERP or any other affiliated network or software platform, and that would be for rating, tracking, closed loop accounting, and documentation, those sorts of things. And the other would be the development of B2B and B2C marketplaces, which you also, again, may do in conjunction with some of the manufacturers in this marketplace, because the way that we look at it is, especially with B2B, because B2C is pretty cut and dry as far as understanding the concept of what that means, right? B2B can be both things. It could be between you and your manufacturer, the way that you integrate and interface with them when you place orders from them. There's a B2B connection there that could be e-commerce related, whether behind a secure firewall, password protected website or anything like that. And there's also B2B between you and perhaps your largest chain restaurant, your franchisees, right? Some of the restaurants and the folks you sell to. That's another B2B, right? Potential connection there that you can make through e-commerce transactions, right? So those are kind of the three most things that we'll talk about, and we'll get into further detail on those, but I just kind of wanted to preface the conversation with that. Oops, hit the wrong button there. And actually, you know what, there is a fourth thing that I would say is of utmost importance, and that is heavy freight decisions can't be an afterthought moving forward. They can't be made, those decisions can't be made down at the dock by the shipping team, at the final stage of the process, right? If you're making those decisions, at the final stop, basically before freight leaves your dock, you're doing a disservice not only to yourself by potentially eroding your margins and not capturing what you should be on a potential freight margin, but you're also losing potential margin from the actual sale of your commodity. But you're also doing a disservice to your end users, your customers, right? Because you may not be optimizing best transit time, best overall service provider, what needs to actually happen for that freight to be a successful delivery to entice your customers to come back for more, right? So freight needs to be at the forefront of many conversations, certainly not all, but many. It's usually a top 4 or top 5 cost center for most of you folks, I'm sure. It needs to be more at the forefront now, especially as the way, as people have changed the way they do business. So B2B and B2C e-commerce has really already started to modernize the food service industry. Many of you folks, many dealers already have B2C web portals, right, websites where you're just selling online to, Kevin's coffee shop or to an actual, chain restaurant, whoever, or someone's house, right? Drew could be ordering something for his house that, whether it's consumables, small wares, or, a commercial type refrigerator for his garage or something like that, right? So that's already, that revolution and evolution has already started. The problem is, at least in our view, since we do a lot of work in the food service industry, is that it's behind, it's lagging compared to other industries. And people's expectations have been molded and shaped by their B2C experiences, especially as it relates to small package, right? So folks now automatically assume, well, if I place an order online, it's probably going to be here, later today or tomorrow or 2 days from now at the latest, right? Well, LTL doesn't necessarily work that way. It was never set up to work that way, right? Carriers were never meant to go from, terminal to, Kevin Brink's coffee shop, right? And utilize a liftgate service and have to make an appointment to make that delivery, et cetera. It just kind of happened based on the way that consumers and generational change have made it happen that way, right? So now everyone's kind of playing catch up. And the integration of LTL shipping costs and other deliverables really into shopping carts and purchasing software and your sales software and your custom marketplaces and portals and your ERP platforms is becoming vital and essential, especially in this industry, because food service compared to other industries as well work on a slim margin. You folks all know that, right? There's not much meat to the bone there to start with, and if you start losing on freight because you're using historical numbers or cost per pound guesses, the overall is, well, we win some, we lose some, hopefully it nets out to be even. Well, it shouldn't be even. You should be winning on those, just like the parcel folks are. So through integration, you can really increase optimization across other departments. So freight can be a margin stabilizer and generator. Right? And what you'll find as we get further down the line here is that freight costs are changing, based on the way that e-commerce has shaped the carrier's behavior and carrier's expectations, right? So the true advantage here, and I know people aren't gonna like hearing this, the true advantage is solutions-based, right? Not pricing-based, because pricing is only going up, for now, and maybe it comes down a little bit when the market softens up a little bit, but there's a new baseline of pricing, right? For all shippers, especially as carriers continue to handle more B2C type shipments. So it's solutions-based, not pricing-based. That's how you're going to get your customers to commit to you and continue to come back. It creates that convenience factor, right? I'm a little tired of talking about Amazon, but I'll talk about them right now anyway. Amazon used to be least cost, right? That was the mindset, was that they're cheaper than everyone. You don't have to look across the internet to figure out who's cheaper. It's going to be Amazon, right? If you actually take a real look now, Amazon is not the least cost anymore. Certainly not on the majority of items anymore, but they are the most convenient. Right? You can go there and say, do I want to spend time looking for what I want and cost it out, or do I just want to click 2 buttons and have it show up tomorrow? That's solutions based. It's not price based anymore. So that's kind of what you want to do for your businesses as you create that for your franchisees, for your chain restaurants, and just for your mom and pop stores, and folks like myself who may be purchasing something. I mean, I can raise my hand and say I have a commercial refrigerator in my home. I do. And I did order it, and I knew what to expect because I'm a shipping guy, from New Jersey. But most people who do that don't necessarily know that it's going to show up on a liftgate, get dropped at your curb, and then you got to figure out how to get it in your house, unless you made particular arrangements to get it in your house with white glove service, and specific appointments and such, right? But so the first thing I kind of want to cover before we get into the details of those 3 or 4 most important things is what the marketplace is saying, what manufacturers, distributors, and consumers are really saying about what the expectation is moving forward for how business is done. So first thing is, 60% of consumers say they want to see an estimated delivery date in the shopping cart, right? And I know from experience, with most of you folks and other dealers, is that most folks, if you are populating a freight rate, a true freight rate in your shopping cart, you're not showing transit time. I know that because we do a lot of them, and just by scaling, seeing what other folks are doing, you're not doing that. And 60% of people say they want to know when it's coming. And LTL, again, is not like parcel, right? The parcel folks, FedEx, UPS, DHL, you can make a sound argument that they are just as much technology companies as they are transportation companies, right? LTL carriers, you cannot say the same about. That is not their focus. That's not their focal point, right? So it's, again, mimicking the parcel feel and experience for LTL. 16% of folks abandoned shopping carts because a delivery option was not provided. Again, you're losing out potentially on sales because you're saying, call us, or email me to get the shipping rate, right? I know many folks do that. 44% abandoned carts because shipping costs were too high. That's something you can obviously play around with in terms of how much you want to charge, not charge, discount, etc. But most folks, again, just think, well, free freight, right? And certain items, specifically in food service, you guys offer free freight. I mean, we all know in this room, freight is not free. But to the end user, the appearance of it being free is something that entices them, right? 35% want to see alternate delivery locations, meaning, hey, maybe Kevin wants something delivered at my coffee shop that I own, but I also want something delivered to my house, right? So can you split that order for me, right? That's not easy to do in LTL. It's possible. We'll talk about how it's possible, but most folks never reach that point, like you could with LTL, with parcel rather. And 71% say they're more likely to shop with sellers offering free shipping. I kind of already discussed that, but we all know that freight not free. Next thing is what manufacturers and distributors are saying, and I think this is very relevant and important. It's that 60% of manufacturers do not yet have an e-commerce site. Now, most manufacturers, not all, but most, ship through a distribution network, dealerships, etc. Right? So most manufacturers aren't necessarily shipping, of heavy equipment at least, to end users. They're going through a network of that. That being said, and we'll get into this later, there still could be a B2B e-commerce component between the manufacturer and the dealer, which should exist. So you're not cutting manual POs. You're not sending an email with a PDF attachment saying, here's my PO, can you please fulfill it, right? There needs to be some sort of automation in there to revolutionize and evolutionize the business. 38% of distributors, do not yet have an e-commerce site. A lot of folks don't. I would say that's probably a fair number that represents, the FEDA members as well. And 75% of manufacturers and distributors plan to have or launch an e-commerce site within the next 2 years. Go ahead, Stacy.
Are these stats based across industry or for our industry?
These are across industry. Although, great point, and I'm just going to open up my questions here. I would certainly love to do something like that across this industry. Perhaps we can put something together to kind of poll everyone and say, hey, what is the state of e-commerce, within food service, and we can kind of put together those facts and figures and work on them. That's a great point. Thank you for that question. And I've mentioned this before, the difference between manufacturing and retail is getting fuzzy, right? Because manufacturers are now acting as drop shippers for e-commerce, whether it's B2B or B2C sales, right? So it's order comes in, we just need the manufacturer ship it direct, to the end user. Well, in many cases, the manufacturer isn't aware of any specific requirements for that end user, right? They're not contacting them. The sale isn't through them. They're just shipping it, right? And that's when things like accessorial fees that weren't expected or anticipated pop up later. And now 2 weeks have gone by. The dealer gets distributor gets a bill for a liftgate fee that was never included in the original costing. And you can't go back to your customer and say, hey, you got to pay, the $75 liftgate fee, right? Sales already closed, right? You need to know those things in advance, and there's a lot of ways in which you guys can achieve that, to make that just life easier for everyone and avoid those underbillings. So B2B e-commerce sales on websites, login portals, marketplaces, and marketplaces grew past $1 trillion. This is B2B for the first time in 2018. So what can you do, to either get started or further enhance your e-commerce strategies in heavy freight? That's what we need to focus on here. So a couple more stats before we get onto those important things is, B2B e-commerce sites, login portals and marketplaces accounted for 7% of total B2B sales. That's not a very high percentage, even though it still surpassed $1 trillion. 49% of B2B sales, which is 7.37 trillion, are still conducted manually, meaning by a person, which sales reps, a phone, calling in, fax, email attachments, getting to that, cutting a PO with a PDF file attached to it, right? It's a manual process. And frankly, the carriers, who you're tendering the freight to, have the same problem. They process 75% of their bill of ladings, which is about 500,000 shipments a day, because they handle about 640,000 shipments a day, LTL carriers do. So about 500,000 a day, someone is touching physically a bill of lading and keying it into a system, right? It's a big problem. It's everyone's problem across multiple industries. But there are ways to basically launch and catapult yourself to the top of the line to say, hey, we're here, we're cutting edge, we are solutions based, and that's how you'll get customers and manufacturers to be key partners with. Industrial manufacturing customers are displaying consumer-like behavior. Now, again, this kind of goes back into, well, they're drop shippers now. They're just as much e-commerce folks as anyone else, even though they're still doing things manually, right? So it's still kind of a, from a fulfillment side, people want the parcel experience again, but it's not there for LTL, just for the taking, right? Like, there's no LTL application pre-built into, your ERP that you purchased. NetSuite doesn't have UPS, freight, or Old Dominion built into their platform, but they do have, UPS, FedEx, DHL, and USPS, right? So LTL has to be built into it as a component. So now we'll get into kind of, those actionable e-commerce and transportation strategies, the things that I kind of alluded to before. What does it mean, and how can you actually, take action to do this, right? So the first one is, the development of digital catalogs and product libraries. So this is, I mentioned this before, the most single important thing, especially as it pertains to food service equipment, that everyone needs to do before you can move forward basically with anything else, right? If you want to automate, freight rating, closed loop accounting, documentation, tracking, just like parcel would, you need to know what you're shipping, right? In many cases, especially again in this industry, many folks have FAK coverage, right? Meaning they can ship a multitude of classifications, multitude of commodities under one freight class, right? It's kind of a gift and a curse in disguise, right? Because it's a gift in that you can, ship multiple things under one class, but when you want to actually automate something and you don't know what that freight class really should be, you can't do it. So developing a freight class for each SKU is of utmost importance, because you won't be able to automate your freight rates in a shopping cart or in your ERP, or give true costing to your accounting team to know, hey, here's our quote, here's what the bill was, does it match, yes or no? Well, if you're quoting improperly every time, then every time you're going to have a no, right? And maybe you lost money, maybe you added margin and you didn't lose money, but you could have made more. I'll give you an example. So for example, refrigeration, whether it's a half a cubic foot college dormitory refrigerator, or a 7 foot tall 29-inch single door reach-in, right? It's all class 150. It's a static class, right? Sinks, however, depending on what it's made out of, how large they are, the purpose of the sink, right, is it's potentially 11 different class commodities, right? It's based on the density. So not only does the commodity matter and the material matter, but the actual density of the object matters, right? So if you're shipping sinks, you can't just say, well, it's a sink, class whatever. You need to know specifically what the packaging density of that sink is, and if there's anything else on that pallet, to know, hey, well, that's actually class 125, so now we can automate our rate based on that 125 classification. So you need to know what the weights and the shipping DIMs are. That's really step one of everything that it predates everything else. Second thing would be integrating live rating into your CRM or your ERP platforms, right? So that's where you would utilize APIs or even EDI, although EDI is kind of going slowly by the wayside, and APIs are kind of more progressively taking over. So APIs integrations, directly into your ERP or your CRM platform that allow you to minimize unexpected undercharges, because you're now automating. Again, you're figuring out what the freight cost is up front, not figuring it out right before it leaves the dock. Right? So now you have it integrated into your system. Sales understands what they should be charging. Accounting understands, what the bill should be when it comes in. And if something doesn't match, you now know that you can dispute that in one way, shape, or form. Or you could potentially figure out, hey, there's a problem here. We think that we quoted with a lift gate. It's not showing with a lift gate. How come it didn't show up on the final bill, right? So shipment rating, for your products coming from multiple origin points is also something that you could do if you automated this, right? So many of you folks have multiple DCs across the country. Or again, if you're in a drop ship scenario where you say, hey, we have one order, we're going to ship half of it from our facility, and the other half is going to go from our drop ship manufacturer, right? Well, if you can't compute what the freight rate will be for both of those shipments, and you're just going to take a guess, you're probably going to lose, right? And you're probably going to undercharge. Based on the actual line haul and on the actual accessorials that were required, right? So automating that process, getting live rating into your ERP or various software applications. If you use Salesforce.com, you can integrate freight rates into your Salesforce applet there. So wherever a freight rate can be populated, you should populate it. So you have a progression of what the freight rate should be and an understanding of that. Next part of this, as I kind of alluded to before with carriers, is the digitization of bills of lading and freight tendering, right? So again, carriers are handling this massive amount of paper, which A, slows them down, and B, makes them prone to manual error, right? That's gonna happen. Well, people who can automate that for a carrier, number one, makes you a shipper of choice, right? Because now you're eliminating manual labor from their operation. And number two, it allows you to tender freight to them automatically instead of saying, hey, we need to make a call down to the carrier ABC, tell them we have 4 skids for pickup. And then 2 hours later, hey, add 2 more skids on there. And then another 2 hours later, hey, add 8 more skids on there. And then the carrier says, well, we don't have room for that, right? We'll have to we can pick up, 7 of those, and the other 6 are going to be, picked up tomorrow, right? Well, if you're automatically tendering it directly into their system, that goes directly into their load board, so they know as you update your system, it updates their system. They say, okay, well, customer ABC, they tendered us, 3, now they tender us more and more and more, and it goes directly into their load board, so you don't have to wait for someone to then key it in and say, oh, sorry, we're all out of space, right? Next thing would be the development of B2B and B2C marketplaces, right? So this is, again, both sides, at least in my opinion, between manufacturer and dealer, and also between dealer and user customer, right? So what we've seen and what we've done for many customers is, especially on the dealer to customer side, is develop basically product catalogs, right? Instead of your paper or your PDF, file of here's all the products we sell and sending that out, develop a specific website or portal for franchisee ABC to place all their orders. You already know what they're buying from you. You already know typically when they're going to buy it. You can anticipate that. Or mostly when the refurbishments are going to happen or replacements, right? Or new things that come out for that franchise are going to occur. You can market that to them directly and build in the freight, right? That way you're not taking guesses, you're not using weighted averages, you're not using cost per pound, historical data, right? You want to win on freight, you should win on freight. Everyone else is, in the parcel world, LTL should be the same thing. It shouldn't be, something that hampers business, right? So flip side, B2C, again, many people already have that in this industry, but being more cognizant of what to bill with regarding to accessorial fees on the B2C shipments, right? So, for example, if you have currently a B2C website, are you asking the right questions of the end user? So if I go to your website and you have things for sale in there, and I put in my zip code, and my address for shipping, are you asking me if I'm a business or if I'm residential, right? Are you asking me if I have a dock or if I don't have a dock? Are you asking me, do I need deployment? Do I not need deployment, right? There are ways to do that without asking those questions outright. You can have a workaround and kind of have a progression, say, commercial, residential, I can click on that button, right? If I click on the residential button, you automatically want to add a lift gate, and a residential delivery charge to your costing, because that's going to happen if I am a residence. Commercial, they click the commercial side of things. Well, okay, you're a business, good. Do you have a dock? Do you not have a dock? Do you need white glove service, right? Right? So asking those questions up front on your B2C website allow you to bill properly and not have to eat freight charges that come in 2 weeks later where you can't bill the customer for it, and just erode away all the margin you had on the sale. So those things are important. And the last thing that's of importance here is that you want to mimic the parcel experience as much as possible, because that's now the expectation. Everyone has that expectation in their personal lives and in their professional lives, right? We see that, everyone knows it. We all understand that. What people most often struggle with from an LTL perspective as far as mimicking that experience is, offering or discounting freight. That's one concept. The other is tracing and tracking and visibility to the end user, right? So a lot of what we've done for many people who want to embrace this experience is, if you go to ABC website and you order, a pair of shoes and as soon as they get that order, they send you a tracking link, right? It says, we're picking your order, here's your tracking link. As soon as, it gets picked up, this will be active, right? Most people can't achieve that in LTL. And there's a reason why. It's because carriers don't offer it. Again, they're not technology companies like UPS and FedEx and USPS and all those are. So LTL, you need to be crafty about the way you do it. So we've developed and help other people develop routing portals, right? That's basically say, here's your landing page, customize it, but here's your landing page, and we use your bill of lading number or the pro number, if you pre-pro your freight, to say, here's your tracking, right? So development of a landing page that mimics the parcel experience, right? Then they have tracking, they have visibility. Every time a carrier scans it, because this carrier is going to scan, the barcode on the freight with the pro number on it. Every time it gets scanned, it updates the landing page. So when I say, hey, I just bought a refrigerator, commercial refrigerator from True Manufacturing, it's come to my house. I know when it got picked up based on when the carrier brought it back to the origin terminal and scanned it. And when it's moving, based on every time it gets to a break or a terminal, carrier's scanning it, right? So it's that experience that you want to try to mimic and achieve. Get Stacy.
I think years ago, you started talking about this, and I'm curious, are you seeing more distributors, I think like bigger distributors tend to have these type of pages? Are you seeing more of this in our industry, or where are we?
I would say, based on my experience in this industry, there's only a few folks who are doing it, and the folks that are doing it are using a house-made solution, right? So they put a bunch of development time into altering and modifying their ERP and other whatever platform they're utilizing to say we want to be able to send out tracking information. Now a lot of that involves them, the food service dealer, going to the carrier for basically a transaction sheet of saying, hey, where's all the freight that we shipped yesterday that you picked up? They then pick from that because they put their sales order number on the bill of lading. They pick from that and then send it. It's still manual, right? But we are seeing a lot more in other industries that we're working with saying we want that, we need that, we want that yesterday, because the demand is to modernize the business, the people that are selling to, the people that are buying from them. Again, it's the small package mentality. It's generational too. So folks want it. Even if they never look at it again, after they get it, it's comfort of them knowing that they have the ability to look at it if they want to, right? So I'll break here for any questions if there are any. If anyone has any questions, I'll check to see if there were any submissions here. If you have any questions that you want to just shout out to me, please feel free to. Sure.
Shipping marks.
Shipping, I'm sorry, what?
Shipping marks.
Okay.
I'd like to encourage our vendors and people, suppliers who are shipping to us to use shipping marks more often, specifically my purchase order number, etc. So, but I don't seem to see any consistency across the board. Can you speak to maybe some things that I might be able to do to encourage them?
So when you say shipping marks, you mean like an identifier number. So if you're saying, hey, I purchased from ABC manufacturer, I want you to make sure you put the PO number on the bill of lading? Right?
Exactly.
Okay, so yeah, that's great. So carriers can, one thing that carriers certainly can do is track a certain number. There's only maybe 3 or 4 numbers that they can actually track throughout a transaction. So if it gets onto the bill of lading, let's say your purchase order number, right? It's on a bill of lading, that can be traced and tracked throughout the process. And you can actually trace the shipment through that marker, through that number. Now, what many people have done, especially some of the larger dealers, have done to kind of ensure that that actually happens, right? Because you're saying, hey, manufacturer ABC, I would like you to put PO number ABC on your bill of lading, right? So what some folks do is they fill out the bill of lading for the manufacturer. Now that's pretty time consuming to do unless you have it automated, right? Or B, have a routing portal for all of your manufacturers to go to, right? Which we developed that for many dealers. A vendor routing portal, supplier, whatever you want to call it, where they input all the information, the specifics, which would just basically be, the zip code pairings, weight class, address, etc. And make it a requirement field, which is what we typically will do, to put in the PO number. Now, they've just created a bill of lading, right, within that routing portal that is now usable for you, and you can tender the freight right from there. So they fill out, essentially filling out the bill of lading. Because if they want instructions from you, how would you typically send them instructions? Like, hey, I have an order, send it to me, or please send it to XYZ location. How would you portray that information to them? In an email or through an attachment of some sort, or?
Yeah, I actually write it on a purchase order. I have a number of different templates.
Right.
And then that's email.
Right. So they're doing all this information anyway, right? They're getting that information from you. They're then figuring out how they're going to ship this, right? And which carrier, whether you're dictating the carrier or it's prepaid ad to you, right? So they're figuring out the carrier, right? They're already doing all of that. So it would be much more succinct if they were able to just click on a link that you provide them and say, hey, for shipping, please go here. Then they're filling out the bill of lading through that portal already. They can hit a button and tender that load to the carrier directly. It's done, it's over. Now your information, your tracking information per se, your purchase order number is already there, it's pre-populated, and it's now being tracked by the carriers, which can then get back to you for your closed loop.
We'll take it.
Very good, thank you. All right, there was one here, let's see. So, okay, is there a difference between carrier and delivery expectations between B2B and B2C commerce? Okay, so yeah, from a carrier and delivery perspective, B2B and B2C is very different, right? So first, B2B is what LTL carriers were set up for, right? Dock to dock, 8 minute basically transactions, right? Rolling up at a dock, unloading freight on their way, right? B2C is about 4 times, based on carriers data, it's about 4 times as long to deliver one B2C shipment as it is one B2B shipment. So about 32 minutes, right? To show up at Kevin's coffee shop with the lift gate after they already made an appointment, unload the freight, and then figure out, because what carriers have to do, which a lot of people don't necessarily think about is, carriers have to think about liability, right? So even if I say, hey, my order is only 100 pounds, 150 pounds, I have 4 guys with me, I don't need lift gate service, so you're not charging me for that, I'll just unload it. Carriers to think, okay, driver, right? Am I going to let these folks unload this freight off the back of my truck and potentially have them either A, drop it and damage it, or B, hurt themselves, right? The answer to that is an emphatic no, right? And it's against the carrier's policy anyway, right? Avoid liability. So that's something the carrier's going to say, we're using liftgate, whether you order one or not. Second position on that is, let's say Kevin's coffee shop is located in a shopping mall, and I have a corner space, right? Marquee space. I'm on the corner, right? And the only thing that I have, the only other access door aside from my front door of my shop is a normal door in the back of the shop, right? So where's the freight going, right? It needs to be put down somewhere. Can't put it down in an active parking lot. Can't put it down on the sidewalk, right? So now you're in a situation where the carrier has to say, either we have to bring this inside because we can't safely leave it somewhere. It's liability, right? It's going to get damaged. A car can hit it. Someone can trip over it, whatever it is. Or we need to take this back to the terminal, and you need to figure out how you want us to deliver this to you, right? 100% of the time, the carrier is going to try to make the delivery on site, right, and not take it back with them, because if they take it back with them on the rest of their pedal run, they're going to have to move that freight the rest of the day, and it's just going to increase the risk that they're going to damage it, which they don't want to do. Plus, a redelivery fee is actually more costly than a liftgate fee and potential inside delivery, right? So it's different for carriers, and the expectations are different because, again, carriers were never intended to go to consumers, houses, right? Like LTL is different now because, yeah, LTL is a big bulky piece of food service equipment, but it's also a TV. It's also a sofa. It's your outdoor furniture in a big box that's strapped to a skid now, right? So those things carriers weren't necessarily prepared for. Now they're doing some things they're doing a little bit differently. There's a driver shortage, right? So the estimate right now is that there's about 50,000 drivers short as an industry, continental U.S. They expect that to increase to about 80,000 short in the next 5 years because the average age of a truck driver is 55 years old. And everyone in this room can attest, like, how attractive is being a truck driver, right? Where are you pulling these folks from to be truck drivers, right? Based on the old stigma of what a truck driver is, right? Right now unemployment levels are really low, right? So there's other jobs you can do making the same or more money, or even a little bit less money, but you're guaranteed to go to work every day and come home every day, right? Driving, you're not guaranteed that. You could be out for a week, you could be out for 2 weeks, you could be out for 3 days, right? weekends, whatever it might be. So carriers are altering their strategies a little bit and their operation a little bit by purchasing, just 26-foot straight trucks, right? You don't need a CDL like a U-Haul truck that you or I could rent, right? You don't need a CDL to drive those things, right? They're purchasing those, and they're purchasing like the Sprinters and all those kind of things where they can fit, 1 or 2 or 4 skids, depending on the size of it, to make kind of home deliveries out of it, right? So, one of the biggest consumers of that type of thing is airports, right? People lose luggage, right? So luggage gets lost or they forget it, and then now you have, 15 suitcases that need to go out for delivery to people's homes. Well, airports are contracting with folks who have fleets of Sprinters and 26-foot trucks. They can load it up, make a pedal run across, wherever, within a certain range, and deliver the suitcases, right? So LTL carriers are starting to take on that mentality because they know that, if you face facts, capacity in the LTL world and truckload world, it's a finite resource, right? There's not going to be any new entrants into the marketplace with 1,200 trailers and 360 terminals opening up tomorrow. Matter of fact, the 19th largest LTL carrier just closed their doors in the biggest booming freight marketplace in history, right? So the 19th largest LTL carrier just removed all their capacity because they were tied too closely to retail. They committed too much capacity, so they didn't have too many drivers, too much trailers. Gave them really good pricing. It wasn't profitable enough for them. And they ended up having to close the doors because they couldn't service the customers that they make money on, right? So carriers have to be careful, with what they're doing. So they have to be smart about how they address the B2C, side of the business. Okay.
Is there still a large issue with finding drivers for LTL, or I know food truckloads too, for like Saturday deliveries or special deliveries? It's very far and few between that you can get that kind of service.
Yeah, well, it certainly is. So it's not, so not only is it finding drivers, period, right? But specific to pinpoint kind of deliveries, like that kind of thing, So there's only so many hours a driver can legally work in a work week, right? Which used to be monitored by pen and paper. This is not a joke. Up until December of last year, hours of service, which is federally regulated, was submitted by pen and paper. So drivers used to have, you can imagine, 2 books. One that they submitted to their employer that says, I drove 90 hours this week, you pay me accordingly. And one that said, I worked 60, that goes to the government, right? It was pen and paper. There was no audit. Now, December of last year, ELDs came into play, electronic logging devices, federal mandate. What does that mean? That means that there is an electronic logging device hooked in directly to the engine compartment of each vehicle, and you have to put in your driver PIN number into this ELD every time you get into a cab, and it logs how often you are driving, how often you are idle, how often you are braking. It tells you when you need to brake, and if you don't brake, it reports you. Right? Doesn't matter if you're trying to go through, hey, I want to get through Manhattan, or I want to go over GW Bridge to beat traffic, right? If I just keep going, I won't sit in it. If you ignore the ELD saying, you're already at your 3.5 hour, you need to brake for 15 minutes, you're gonna get reported, right? There's only so many reportings you can take before you're off the road, right? So most drivers have already consumed their hours of service before you get to that Saturday point. So now you're looking at a smaller pool of drivers available. You say, okay, well, who has hours left? Who didn't work during the week? Who did we stagger to say, well, we can make a delivery on Saturday because we have these 4 drivers at the terminal kind of dedicated to, to Saturday deliveries or, specialized deliveries. But understand that when they do that, when they set that time aside, they're taking that away from their main operation, right? Which creates a capacity crunch, which allows carriers to say, well, we need to price business based on the fact that we know we're finite resource, right? So what carriers, I'll tell you what carriers are doing. Carriers right now are essentially creating driver schools. Many of them, all of them have, almost all of them have. Driver schools that they fund, that they pull most people from their docks to say, hey, these dock workers identify as maybe potential for looking to make more money, and maybe they're good for the driver life and they're responsible, et cetera, et cetera. So they'll put them through driving school. They'll do it, they'll pay for it, and they'll sign an agreement that says, you'll be a driver for us for 2 years, whatever it is, right? We paid for your schooling, and that's where they're trying to pool new drivers from. Aside from that, it's kind of difficult to even go to somebody in my, my age bracket or even younger to say, hey, driving is a good thing you should do, right? That's not an easy sell, even though, it's a lot different now than it used to be, right? Like you can see, many drivers have DirecTV on the outside of their cabs, and all those kind of things. Like, you're not plugging into your truck stop to hopefully get, 4 TV stations, right? But, wireless internet, all that kind of stuff, better sleeping cabins, but it's still a lifestyle choice, right? It's still, give and take with, what people maybe want to do or don't want to do. So it is it's very difficult, as far as driving, especially with the average age of drivers, being 55. Most people are getting ready to, either A, retire, or B, especially specific to ELDs, a lot of drivers took pay cuts because even though they weren't supposed to be making, $90,000, $100,000 a year, they were. But now the ELDs are there, they're making 70, right? So it's like, okay, well, do I want to keep doing this for a lot less money, or do I want to go work construction or do something else that pays just as much, if not more, and I'm home every single night? Thank you, I appreciate it.